Welcome back to Crawford-Clark Close-Up and the second of our interviews in our James Bond retrospective. Joining me today, I have got Jack Lugo. Hi, Jack. Welcome to the show.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me. It was nice to hear from you. And yeah, this sounds great. What you're doing, doing like a revving up to the release of No Time to Die, and getting the hype train going again. I think it's fun to finally with all the anticipation and everything. I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, hasn't it? I mean, we just sort of spoke about that before we started recording, but yeah, it's so anticipated. I think the sort of excitement levels, even for the sort of hardcore fans like you and I, it's kind of ebbed and flowed a little bit over time. But from my point of view, anyway, I'm raring to go now. I'm ready for this film to come out. I just want to see it. I assume you're the same.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of I want to see the film, although I don't know if I'll be able to. I don't know if I'll actually go to the theaters to see it. I might wait. I know that sounds blasphemous at this point, but I'm still not 100% comfortable going to the movie theater, even though I'm vaccinated and
Yeah.
the theaters are open and we have fewer restrictions. So I'm kind of on the fence. I mean, the good news is I'm excited for the release because I mean, even if it gets released and I don't go to the theaters, I'll get to see it. I'm still closer to seeing it than to not seeing it. Because obviously it'll have its theatrical run and then eventually get released so you can watch it at home.
And the thing is, I don't know for you guys over overseas, but obviously for us over here, there seems to be a much shorter time lapse now between actual sort of theatrical releases and home releases. It seems to be so much shorter now than it ever used to be.
Yeah, it used to be the standard window was 90 days. I think every studio is different. It's not clear like what because obviously with Bond it's MGM is the distributor. They do it through United Artists Releasing, which it's a partnership with them and Annapurna. That's the domestic release, and then overseas where you are, it's Universal. So I don't know how that all gets worked out in terms of the theatrical window. My guess is that it'll still be 45 days. So 45 days seems to be the new standard. So yeah, about a month and a half, you'll be able to watch it at home if you don't get to the theater.
Cool. Okay, so sort of we're going to come back to the case of No Time to Die because I want your sort of opinion of what's what you're expecting from the 25th film, but we'll come to that a little bit later. I have just noticed, by the way, a rather fetching shirt that you're wearing there at the moment. Very apt for the conversation today.
Yeah, George, I think he opened the shop on his website this year recently, and and I like collecting Bond shirts and stuff. I have a few shirts with different Bond posters on them, and then when I saw that George had this and there's a whole bunch of different designs you can get. I just went with the basic one. I think this is the first one he put out, or one of the first designs that they started selling. So, but yeah, I like it. I mean, obviously, how can you not support George Lazenby?
No, of course, absolutely, and we'll get into that. Obviously, I mean, I'm wearing a more generic shirt, I guess, today, but it's kind of encompassing everything. So there we go. That's what I've decided to bring to the show today. Okay, so a little bit of background. Not just for myself, because I'd like to know a little bit more about your sort of Bond interest, but where did it all start for you? Where did your interest in Bond begin?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't like a hardcore fan until recently, but I mean, my love of Bond, I guess, started with my dad when I was growing up. I mean, I think the first Bond movie I saw in the theaters was GoldenEye. So I would have been around 15 or 16 at the time when that came out. And my dad used to pick me up from school and take me to the movies. I mean, my parents are divorced, so that was my time that I spent with him. He would take me to the movies, and that was one of the that's the first Bond film I remember seeing in the theaters. And then obviously, after that, you make a point every time there was a new film to go see it in the theaters. But I honestly didn't wasn't like a hardcore. I was a hardcore like Star Trek fan. I'm a a baseball fan. Like I was a Mets fan and stuff. So I didn't get into like Bond hardcore until like the JBR podcast started like around 2014. I have a long commute to go to work, so it's like I was looking for podcasts, and back in 2014, podcasts were, to me, they were relatively new. I mean, obviously they had been around for a while before then, but I found there were only a couple, there were a few that immediately sprung up, but JBR struck me because it was in the early days of JBR. It was like they had like maybe 3 or 4 episodes up at that point. They had just started, and I was like, okay, I wanted to, I guess because they had just started and there wasn't like a huge backlog like there is now. I immediately, started listening to them, and listening to them talk about Bond made me want to just, dive into my own sort of love of the franchise, and pursue the things that interest me about Bond and stuff, and go ahead and like rewatch the film and sort of all the films, and go and and really go deep, read the Fleming books, and so I owe a lot of my Bond fandom kind of emergence to Tom and Chris and the JBR podcast. So, but and then obviously ever since then I got really involved. They invited me to sort of work on the website and do blogs, and I've written a lot of blogs for the JBR website. And I mean, there are things that sort of like interest me, everyone has their own kind of niche of like what they appreciate about Bond, and for me, I love great storytelling. I love Ian Fleming. I love the stories that sort of are a bit more grounded and gritty, and I love the fact that the Fleming Bond isn't exactly the way you might picture it if you had never read one of the books and you only know the Bond franchise from the movies. So that's kind of what appealed to me. I mean, I know a lot of other, there are a lot of other areas that other people specialize in. That I'm kind of like a fish out of water. I just recently interviewed Matt Spazer, who he has that book from Tailors with Love, which is great, and I learned a lot about him from the clothes, but the clothes and the fashion part of it, of Bond, it never really, that didn't really capture me. But I think from my interview with Matt, I learned is that the stories of the people behind that stuff, that even though that like aspect of the fandom isn't like my specialty, it's not my forte, there's still a lot to learn. So that's kind of what like my journey through like the fandom of Bond is that there's a lot that can be learned, and even if it's like there's an aspect of it that's like not your big thing, it's not your forte. There's still, there's still plenty to get from listening to people who do specialize in those things.
Well, yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I always sort of, I don't know, that sounds a bit vain, really, but I always sort of consider myself to know quite a lot about Bond, having sort of grown up with it from a young age. Again, I was introduced to it, I guess, from my dad, really. I remember they sort of showed the Bond movies once a week. I think it was in the run-up to The World Is Not Enough, so it would have been 99. So I was fairly young at the time. I mean, I was getting into Bond around sort of age 12, sort of 11, 12. So for me, my interest in it just developed from that, really. And I know my brother and I would sort of, my granddad would come round when we were a lot younger, and we'd sort of watch a lot of the films together. And we'd all have our favourites, and the ones that we watch, a little less. We ended up sort of wearing out some of the VHS tapes because we'd sort of record them off of the TV, and it's one of those things. You just when you do become a fan of something, you will just continually try to get as much of it as you can, and that's kind of what we did, really. But it's cool that you mentioned James Bond Radio, obviously Tom and Chris, because I sort of stumbled upon their podcast by chance, really. I was living in Surrey, sort of close to London at the time, and I don't know what I was looking for. Again, I think I was just looking for something, YouTube videos, and then all of a sudden it just appeared, and that was it really. I just kind of began listening from practically from the beginning, and it's just been a regular thing now. I just really look forward to a new episode. I think they're just broken 200 episodes now, which is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, they just posted their interview with Martin Campbell, which is fantastic.
So
And
good.
yeah,
So
I mean, they've done a fantastic job, just sort of you know diving into areas of like the Bond franchise that, like, not they're great at asking the right questions. Like even earlier on, like when they were doing like their deep dives into Thunderball, and they interviewed Sylvan Mason and and Robert Sellers, who wrote that the book on Thunderball, the Battle for Bond book. Like they really know how to sort of get to like the core of like what makes these things interesting. So that's why I've always been drawn to them.
yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, 100%. And I'm looking forward to them sort of properly returning. I mean, by the time this interview's sort of up online, JBR will have returned. I hope in September. But yeah, I'm looking forward. Obviously, again with the countdown to No Time to Die as well. Obviously, they're going to be delving into that, and we're going to be getting on to Daniel Craig movie reviews, I guess, soon, because I think the last
Yeah.
movie review was Die Another Day, and that was
Yes.
that was a hell of an episode.
How
That
can
was
you
so
forget
good.
that? Yeah, no, that's the one everyone has been waiting for since anyone who follows the podcast has been waiting for it since they started it. Is because Tom has been so vocal about how much he hates Die Another Day, um, and that it didn't disappoint. I mean, I think they could have done like 3 episodes on just the Madonna song alone.
Oh yeah. Yes, yeah, I agree. Can you tell us a little bit about your own podcast then? So you started obviously Bond and Banter earlier this year, I believe it wasn't it? It was the beginning of this year you started.
Yeah, yeah.
How's that going?
It's going pretty well. I just was looking. Obviously we had the pandemic last year, and yeah, and JBR was sort of on a break, and I wanted to sort of I thought of this idea of like, okay, there's so many interesting people in the fandom that I've interacted with, and and the concept of like, okay, a lot of these people, they know these films and the franchise well enough that they could sort of improvise as some of the characters. The idea actually started when I was sort of chatting with Bill Koenig, who runs the Spy Command. We were chatting, and it was like he brought up the fact that he did a Michael G. Wilson impression, and that he had a decent one, and I had never heard it before he mentioned it. But he mentioned, and then that sort of like the idea started percolating in my head. It's like, well, what if we did a series of people who they come on as a character from the Bond either from the fictional films, or from that we know that's been involved with on real people like Michael G. Wilson. So like yeah, and then the idea just came. It's like, you know what, if I had Bill as Michael G. Wilson, I can on a podcast where I can ask him questions in character. I can ask him a whole bunch of questions that like Michael G. Wilson would never get asked by anyone because they shut down the interview, or or he'd hang up or whatever. And so that was the idea. It's like and I still think I haven't gone as like I think I still think I've held back just because like when he does the impression, it's almost realistic. I mean, I've obviously given the character a hard time. And the way Bill reacts is just perfect, because I imagine that's how the real Michael G. Wilson would react.
It is so good. It is uncanny. I've got to say, I had to listen to it again just the other day, and it is, yeah, you close your eyes and you picture Michael G. Wilson, don't you? It's just, it's amazing.
Yeah, so I just so it kind of started with that, and then I figured there are enough people really hardcore Bond fans who I've interacted with that would sort of take on whatever and they basically they choose their characters and whatever they're comfortable with, and I just sort of come up with questions that you might want to ask, like if you lived in a fictional world where you can interview Max Zorin, or if you can interview Zukovsky or something like that, like what kinds of questions would you ask them if they were real people, and I try to approach it that way.
No, it's a great concept. I think I think it works really well. It's yeah, I've got a lot more of them to go back through and listen to. So that's one of my missions. So in the sort of run up to No Time to Die, I'm just trying to get as much sort of Bond goodness as I can at the moment. I'm actually working my way back through the Fleming novels. So I'm at Dr. No at the moment. So yeah, I'm midway through. I've got to be honest, actually. I've never actually read the whole lot. I'd always get up to about, I think the furthest I got the last read through was probably Thunderball, either Thunderball or Spy Who Loved Me. And for whatever reason, I don't know, my interest left, and I was kind of pursued reading something else. But I'm determined now. I've got about halfway through.
Oh yeah, you've got to.
I'm just going to keep going now. I'm going to keep going.
What's interesting is that the character really does change. I mean, he does. I'm almost like by the time you get to Man with the Golden Gun, he's like a lot more introspective and almost depressed. Because of obviously Tracy is killed. But even beyond that, he's disenchanted with being an agent and stuff like that. So it's stuff that you wouldn't, because obviously we know the Bond brand from the cinema. How it's sort of like Bond is this cool person, everyone wants to be him. In the Fleming books, I mean, obviously it starts off that way to some degree. But by the time you get to the last Fleming book, you don't want to be Bond, because he's gone through hell, so and he's not really happy. So it's interesting to sort of obviously Eon, the Broccoli family, they're invested in having Bond be this sort of this brand that you aspire to, like the character being an aspirational kind of character that you want to emulate and imitate. And I think Fleming, on the other hand, I don't think that's what he wanted. That's just my take on it. I don't think obviously he was pleased. He wanted the character to be successful and he wanted to make money. But I don't think he wrote the character as someone that should be imitated. I think it's more, like he wanted to sort of explore the internal life and kind of like, what he, everything that he goes through, what the toll that it takes on him and that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's really insightful, actually. I had not really considered it before, but yeah, I think a lot of that rings true, actually. Certainly reading back through the book, you get, a lot of people say that obviously with the screen Bond that humor is such an important element, and you can see it sort of weave through some of Fleming's narratives, but it is very much down to business, isn't it? With his stories, it's the plots are, for the most part, they're straightforward to follow, which makes the book so digestible, doesn't it? I think as a fan, but also just as if you're not really big into Bond and you're wanting something to read, they're good, effective stories. They're good time killers, if you like. So yeah, I'm enjoying them so far. If I had to pick a favorite from where I'm up to so far, it's definitely From Russia with Love. It's the best written of the books that I've got to so far. Yeah,
definitely.
Oh, so from books, I've got one more question to ask you about the films before we sort of get into the meat of the discussion. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, as I've done with some other people that I've interviewed. Right now, doesn't have to be in any particular order, but if you know, I'm telling you, asking you right now, your 5 favorite of the Bond films,
Okay.
what would be your top 5?
Well, definitely, From Russia with Love I usually cite that as my favorite Bond film. So I would say it's probably From Russia with Love, top tier. Then I would probably, it's kind of hard to decide, um, like the next, the number two, because I kind of alternate between Casino Royale and Majesty. So either on either day, my number two Bond film will either be Majesty's or Casino, and then the other one would be number three. So that would be, I kind of switch off. I mean, there are times where I rewatch Majesty's, like, oh no, this is definitely up there, slightly above Casino. But then I'll rewatch Casino and then say the same exact thing about Casino. So I
Yeah.
think they kind of are interchangeable for me in terms of ranking. And then after so for spots 4 and 5, I would say that's a little bit more difficult. It depends on the mood. Like if I'm really in like a Roger mood, then For Your Eyes Only would probably be number 4.
Oh,
Um, and then probably Living Daylights would be number 5.
that's a really good top 5 actually. I'm impressed because it's very similar to my taste in Bond. I mean, it's my top 5. I think at the moment, again, if a Roger crept into my top 5, it would be For Your Eyes Only as well, because personally I think it's his best one. Um, if there was a Pierce in there, oh, it's really difficult because I'd said this in another interview as well, actually, recently, where it really fluctuates between GoldenEye and The World Is Not Enough for me. I think The World Is Not Enough, for sort of perhaps nostalgic reasons, because that was the first one I went to see sort of in theatres, but also it's quite an easy watch and it's quite a solid film for the most part, I would say. But my top 5, yeah, From Russia with Love is definitely in there. Casino's definitely in there. Majesties is definitely in there. Um, Dalton's my favourite Bond, so both of his films are great, but License to Kill is in my top 5. Living Daylights would probably just be outside it, but literally just number 6 or number 7, probably.
Yeah, I love License to Kill too. I think it's underrated.
It is.
Still.
It,
Yeah.
it is. It really is. It really is underrated. And probably because I've watched it more recently as well. Skyfall. I really enjoyed Skyfall. Okay, right. Let's talk about George Lazenby. For the for the non-fan, it's very much that sort of, oh, he's the guy that did one film, took over from Sean Connery. Sean Connery should have continued, blah blah blah. For me personally, well, I know for both of us, we ranked Majesties so high. One, because it is a fantastic film, and two, because George Lazenby is Bond in it. I would say. What
Yeah.
what do you think?
I think, yeah, I think it's a top tier film. I think maybe some of the reason why Lazenby, obviously, there's been a resurgence, obviously, where more fans are open to the idea that he was a great Bond. Obviously, it's hard to encounter. Most Bond fans I encounter now are like, love Majesties, love George Lazenby. But I think if you were to go back maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that wouldn't, or maybe slightly longer, that wouldn't have been the case. So I think I honestly I think social media and podcasts like JBR and and other places, I think the more fans sort of dive into the history of the franchise and dive into the story of how that film was made, which obviously, the making of the book, on the making of Majesties is fantastic. His name escapes me now. Charles
It's,
Charles
yeah,
Hopen's
that's
son. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So once you actually dive into the history of it, and obviously the book, the Fleming book. I mean, it's one of it. I mean, I would say From Russia with Love is like my favorite Fleming book, but I would say Majesties is my like is a close second to that. It's a very well constructed book and very well written, and so I think I'm glad that there's been this resurgence, and Lazenby himself, I think he gave a fantastic performance. Obviously, I don't think anyone can really pull off that final scene with with Tracy being killed the way he did. I mean, I know Tom and Chris have talked about this on JBR. If you put Connery in that scene, I don't know that he would sell it as well as Lazenby did.
No,
Um,
no,
yeah,
I'd absolutely, yes, I agree with that. I'm not saying anything against Connery's Bond because I mean he was the he's the first Bond classic films, but yeah, he's put him in Majesties. I'm not sure it's the right kind of tone for him. So I think in a lot of ways it's very sort of serendipitous about the Bond series. People just things just happened at the right time, and
yeah.
it's good on George Lazenby, a
I
non-actor.
I think I mean, I think early, like there are spots in the film where his line readings aren't like the best. I think like his maybe his scene with M, you kind of want Connery there, and when he does the first, my name's Bond, James Bond, it does come across a little bit stiff, like the delivery of it, and it could just be because obviously there's this you're looking at it from the perspective of like you're used to Connery when you hear him deliver that line for the first time. But yeah, I think overall, I mean, he's a very I believe that he's Bond when I'm watching that movie. But I think maybe the first time I watched it, it maybe didn't come across the way. It took me a few times watching it to sort of warm up to that idea, and then finally realize no, he's actually fantastic. You there were just maybe a couple flaws here and there, but I mean, he sells it so well.
Talking about the resurgence as well of George Lazenby, I was lucky enough before sort of I'm trying to think when it was. Yeah, so it would have been 2019 for the for the anniversary of the film at BFI in London. They were holding a screening of the film, and obviously there was like a Q&A with George afterwards, and the response from the crowd there was amazing. So many people queuing up for his autograph pictures as well. It was he's clearly popular with the fans, and I think it's quite telling the fact that he only did the one film. Obviously, we'll come on to that a little bit later and the reasons for that. But I want to ask you: did you see the Becoming Bond, like the
Oh yeah.
Lazenby biopic from Josh Greenbaum? What did you think of that?
I enjoyed it. I mean, I mean, it does get a little bit silly at times. So I think some of the campiness, like there are times where I kind of want to see like a straight, real, like a straightforward documentary, as opposed to one that sort of takes a more frivolous kind of approach. But it's still entertaining, and it's obviously a lot of it it's based on the stories that he tells in the interview that he gave for it, and they're just reenacting it. But yeah, I mean, it was enjoyable. I know that for the longest time there has been like a second documentary in the works, but I don't think some kind of logistical thing is keeping it from being released, because I know that there is another documentary that was circulated around the time that Becoming Bond came out for Hulu, and it never got picked up to be distributed, and there are whole sorts of logistical issues that keeping it from coming out. I think it's called that This Never Happened to the Other Fella. I think that's the name of the documentary. I don't know when or if it'll come out, but supposedly that documentary is a more straightforward approach to George's life, and like it's treated more like a traditional documentary, and it goes into not just Majesties but also his life after Majesties, and the films that he did. He was almost in a movie with, he was almost in Bruce Lee's movie before Bruce Lee died, and and obviously he did a number of notable films and TV appearances after Majesties, and he had an acting career, even if it's not one that was as like the other Bond actors. So it's I love Lazenby. I could talk about Lazenby all day.
So, yeah, so obviously, so if we sort of go back to the beginning with it, so Peter Hunt comes on as director. He's actually, I didn't realize this until recently. He was actually announced to direct Majesties as the sixth film in the series about 3 months after You Only Live Twice was actually released. So such a quick turnaround. But I know he was so keen to sort of lend a directing eye over one of the films, because obviously he'd spent the first 5 years of Bond in the editing rooms. What do you make of Peter Hunt as a director? What do you make of his style?
Well, from everything I've read, I mean, he was, very much, committed to making sure that it was, that they were adapting Fleming's story. I think maybe because as a reaction to You Only Live Twice going so fantastical and being the first Bond film to seriously veer away. I mean, all the Bond films prior to that obviously embellished, and it wasn't like literal word for word adaptations of Fleming, but at least they were close enough that you can sort of, and in some cases, as in Goldfinger, the film improved on an aspect of the book, because obviously in the film, it was about radiating the gold, so this way, Goldfinger's own reserves, become more valuable, whereas in the book it was about stealing all the gold from Fort Knox, and they figured, and they, looked at the logistics of that, and obviously figured that that wouldn't be logistically possible. So the film obviously corrects, an oversight from the book. So with Peter Hunt and his approach to adapting Majesties, I think he, I admire the fact that he wanted to stick to the Fleming material. And, I mean, obviously there are still some differences. Like obviously, I don't think, and it's been a while since I've read the Fleming Majesties, but I think I don't think Tracy gets kidnapped, by Blofeld in the book. I think he put that in there. I think that was one of the, one, obviously because they wanted to get Tracy in more of the story.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, Peter Hunt, I think did a phenomenal job. Obviously, we're all talking about it all these years later.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what I mean, there's an interesting quote from Pete Hunt, because there was a lot of sort of background, and it's mentioned in the Becoming Bond documentary as well, that Peter Hunt was furious to sort of to learn that they were sort of thinking of casting a man with no kind of acting experience whatsoever. But there is an interesting quote that I found from Peter Hunt. So I'm just going to read it out. So he's actually said, obviously, about Lazenby as Bond: "I'm more convinced than ever that the choice of George Lazenby was right. With Lazenby, we revert to the concept of the Bond implicit in Ian Fleming's books. The essence of Bond is that of a young man who has an inherent sexual assurance, something which was predominant in my mind during the search for the new 007. So obviously, George was very different to Sean in his approach, but the fundamentals of the character are still there, aren't they? The fact that they're both, they're very, very assured people. You can tell as soon as George walks into a room in Majesties, he comes across as, as the professional. He comes across as just a straight continuation of Bond. I think the jarring is obviously the fact that at the time it was, a new actor taking on the role. But I think that's quite interesting. I think to sort of hear that the director himself actually was impressed with George in the end, and probably felt that he could have continued for more films. I mean, personally, from my point of view, I would love to see a George, George in Diamonds Are Forever. Because
Oh
I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
There's just something about Diamonds Are Forever that just doesn't click with me at all in the series. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, Tom and Chris have talked about, like the ultimate fantasy would be to have, Lazenby return, and not just Lazenby. It would be nice to have Peter Hunt return
Yeah,
for Diamonds Are Forever, but that's not the film that we got. And I think, obviously everyone, who's talked about this, points to the whole, obviously at the beginning of Diamonds Are Forever, Bond is looking for Blofeld, and presumably he's upset because he wants to revenge for what happened to Tracy, but it's never really explicitly stated, and then the film becomes more of a romp, and the sort of the revenge aspect sort of falls by the wayside. Even when he encounters, Blofeld, he thinks he's killed Blofeld for most of the film, but when he encounters Blofeld later, you don't get the sense of like, Bond is really, trying. You don't get the sort of desire from Bond that he wants revenge for Tracy. You just get the sense that, oh, okay, well, Blofeld is my, someone I just have to stop what Blofeld's planning. So you don't get it. You don't get the idea that it's personal beyond that.
no, that's true. I mean, obviously, so looking to sort of, the premiere of Majesties. George had made it quite clear by that time. Obviously, he came to the premiere full beard. People saying to him, "No, you can't possibly show off being the new 007 with massive beard, really long hair." But he'd made up his mind by that time, and he'd had advice, whether good or bad, from Ronan O'Reilly, of course, who was the founder of Radio Caroline. So, yeah, it was it's
It's unfortunate.
prophetic, obviously, but
It's
yeah.
unfortunate, but the other thing that when I watched that Becoming Bond documentary is I was when he went on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, which
Mm.
I don't think Johnny Carson might not have been there. It might have been a guest host, but yeah, as far as the way I guess fans in the United States found out was that appearance on Johnny Carson, and that appearance, that show is not available. Like it has been lost. You can't find footage of it. That's the one thing. Like because as soon as I watched that Becoming Bond documentary, I wanted to find out. Okay, is there footage of George
Mm.
Lazenby on the Tonight Show announcing that he's leaving Bond? So that in Becoming Bond, you see a recreation of it. But yeah, that the footage of that show has been lost, and I think it's because obviously back then they did not think that the shows would be sought after or replayed or anything like that. They were just live broadcasts, and in many cases, if they were taped, they were taped over. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
so it's unfortunately that has been lost to time. And I mean, honestly, I've also been sort of on the lookout for like contemporaneous reports of Lazenby quitting, or even like well, that they didn't do recaps the way we do recaps of shows now, but some kind of report about the Tonight Show, where that Tonight Show appearance. I would love to see one. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
my
yeah.
friend, who also Linda Zhu, who does James is involved with James Bond Radio as well. She was on like a research mission to find that kind of some kind of report referring to the Tonight Show appearance of George Lazenby, and she couldn't find anything, which is interesting because you would have thought that it would have been in the newspapers at that time.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
maybe it's out there and it's in some kind of archive or something, and we just haven't found it. But
Uh,
it would be interesting.
it may surface one day. We never know. But
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, let's have a chat about Roger Moore and obviously his legacy within Bond. So this is it's obviously becomes Bond, well, introduced to the world as Bond, actually in 1972, so 10 years after the release of Dr. No. 7 films, longest. Well, I was going to say longest tenure as Bond, but actually that's Daniel Craig now with all of the
up until then,
place. But yeah, certainly, yeah, up until that point, the longest actor in the role. What do you think of Moore as a Bond?
He was fantastic. I think each of the Bonds sort of brought sort of the sensibility of their time as Bond. So I think he was probably the perfect Bond for the 70s, and the beginning of the 80s. So yeah, he kind of obviously, he was different from Connery. Connery, obviously, he had that sort of the kind of brute killer vibe that he can sort of convey, when he needed to, whereas Moore didn't really, Moore was all about being the charming kind of gentleman, as a lot of people have referred to in interviews, and he's suave, and I guess, but when Moore is, like in cases like Free Eyes Only, when he kills Locke, he can be, like, but you get the sense that he didn't like the brutality, which, I mean, I think, as the Fleming books wore on, Bond didn't really get much enjoyment from the brutality of, the missions and all that stuff. I mean, obviously there are departures. Obviously the film became a little bit campy, and Moore, I think, did the humor a lot. He was very successful at doing the humor, and he was able to sort of, as he has said famously in interviews, he made, instead of making himself James Bond, he made James Bond Roger Moore. You don't watch one of, when you watch a Roger Moore Bond film, you kind of, obviously, you're watching a Bond film, so the character is Bond, but you're always sort of, you can't ignore that you're watching Roger Moore. It's his personality is effusive, and you kind of, and you embrace it. I think he made it. What was what was great about him is that he got audiences to sort of embrace his approach, rather than sort of like, snicker and be like, well, this is not what Connery would do. So yeah, I think he brought a quality that I think was needed during that time in the 70s, because more people were looking towards, the world was super serious. Obviously, you had a lot of things going on. You had, Vietnam, at least in America, you had, civil rights movement, and obviously globally you had the Vietnam War, you had Nixon administration, Watergate, all that stuff. And the idea of movies being entertainment, and Bond movies being escapism, I think was, what that time, I guess, what that period needed, at least for Bond films. Obviously, there were a lot of films that sort of took the opposite approach, but for the Bond films, I guess that's for that period, that's what they needed to be.
Yeah, I think. I mean, when I think of Roger Moore as Bond, he's, if I was going to do a ranking of the Bonds, he wouldn't be one of the higher ones. But if I was doing a ranking of enjoyability of the films, he'd be pretty high, because if I want just an escapist couple of hours, I'm more likely to put on a Roger Moore movie than I am, probably like a Dalton or a Connery, really, because you want that kind of escapism sometimes with Bond. You want to see him sort of dress up as a clown trying to defuse a bomb. You want him fighting on the Golden Gate Bridge with Max Zorin. You want to see some of those things sometimes. And I think Roger played it in such an inimitable sort of way. I think that he did bring so much to the series. Something that's interesting as well, like you said, I know Roger had previously said in a lot of interviews that he took the approach of Bond as somebody who killed but didn't actually enjoy killing. I think he'd sort of quoted from one of the novels saying like Bond had come back from a mission and he'd done what he needed to do, sort of dispatched whoever it was, but hadn't actually, but was getting sort of fatigued with the idea of being a spy. So I think that those elements kind of creep in quite well into sort of Roger's sort of personification of Bond. Something I also really like as well is not just Roger, but the fact that the other actors as well around Roger there've been a lot of references back to Tracy, obviously, and the fact that Bond has lost somebody that he's loved. So with Moore, it's obviously the conversation that he has with Anya in The Spy Who Loved Me, where she's kind of giving like a deconstruction of him as of his character, and sort of many lady friends, but only married once, wife killed, sort of cuts her off. You get that sense that they're trying to bring these things into they brought it into Spy Who Loved Me, and I think it works really well, and the reaction that Moore's Bond gives is really genuine there as well. And a lot of people don't really consider moments like that when they talk about Roger's Bond. They just think of the slapstick and the goofiness, but there are sort of those sort of tender, quieter moments as well that's reflective moments that I think work really well.
Yeah, definitely.
And also, of course, when I mentioned that it's happened with other Bonds as well. Obviously, in License to Kill, you've got Felix and Della as Bond's driving off from their sort of wedding reception, saying, he was married once, but it was a long time ago. And I guess perhaps a little bit tenuous, but in The World Is Not Enough, Electra and Bond first meet, and Electra's saying, "Have you ever lost a loved one, Mr. Bond?" So it's moments like that I think work really well, and they sort of thread the series together well, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. But yeah, I think as we mentioned, he does. Roger does the comedy very well, but he can be serious, and I mean I brought it up before, but when he kills when he Locke by kicking his car over the cliff. That's a very. I know Roger himself didn't want to do that, but it's a very. Yeah, I think that's when you see that side of Bond that of like he doesn't want to be a killer, but he can if he needs to be.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. Do you have any particular sort of standout moments from the sort of Roger Moore era of Bond? I mean, there's 7 films to choose from.
Oh yeah,
and apart from what we've discussed, I mean, are there any sort of particular standout moments, whether it's action sequences or like quieter dialogue driven moments? What sort of stands out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I think. I mean, obviously, we've mentioned the humor and how he can get away with saying certain lines, like in "Live Let Die" when he's when Rose what's her name Rose Carver
Rosie Carver, yeah.
Rosa Carver yeah when he I mean the dialogue is very witty and like you can't I don't know that Sean would have pulled it off to that degree, but like when he tells her when she says, "Oh well, I'll get killed," and he's like, "Well something like they had just made love and stuff like that." You know the line.
Yes.
I'm plugging it.
I certainly wouldn't have killed you before, or something like that.
Right. Yes. So like stuff like that, where like if you like when you're really young and you're watching those films, you don't really get that it's sort of like a reference to necrophilia. But when you get older and you see lines like that, he manages to pull it off so that like it as you get older and you see those quips and and you hear those quips again, you really sort of you can it feels like you're in on a joke with him, and I think that's the thing that I think what Roger did best is like of all the Bond actors, he's the one that you kind of feel like when he makes a quip, you feel like you're in a bar, sitting next to him, and he's and you're sharing some kind of an inside joke. And I think that's what kind of draws me into his films. Is that kind of personality is, I'm just drawn to. So yeah, I mean, there are moments like that. I think, and I think with his, with women, and with the female leads in the film, he has, he always manages to find some kind of chemistry.
Yeah.
The chemistry. Well, the chemistry, he doesn't need to find it. It always seems natural. So, obviously, when you live and let die, I think is sort of like the high. I guess usually the first Bond films are where you have the most iconic moments, the moments that sort of spring to mind. So yeah, when he's with Solitaire and they sleep together for the first time, in any other actor you might think, well, this guy's a creep, he's tricking her. But with Roger, you kind of give him a pass, and I know that sounds terrible to say now, because
Yeah.
everyone
No, I
is
know what you mean.
super aware of when and but it works within that film. Yeah, I mean, and then obviously, there are a lot of great moments in For Your Eyes Only, and even Moonraker. I mean, like, I think the one flaw of Rogers that, yeah, you can tell when the stuntman's been brought in, especially towards the later ones. But
Yes.
you kind of want to give him a pass. You kind of just want to accept it and just lose yourself in the film. And I think that's there are not too many actors that can do that. They're because most anyone else you would say, oh, this completely takes me out of the film. But with him, it's like you kind of root for Roger. Even if you notice something that flawed, a flaw in the film or something like that, you kind of just want to go along with it because, like, Roger's going along with it. So how can you not?
That's a great way of putting it, actually. I think, yes, yeah, no, I agree with that, definitely. In terms of the quips and things as well, I think certainly as the movies go on, they almost get more outrageous. I mean, by the time you get to A View to a Kill and the sort of conversations that he's having there with Jenny Flex is just is extraordinary, really. But I think my personal favourite, if I had to pick a line that I think was Roger was just born to say, is when he arrives in Egypt in The Spy Who Loved Me. And meets Hussein, and the woman comes over because he's sort of thinking, oh, I must get on with my mission. But no, when one is in Egypt, one should delve deeply into its treasures. I think that was made for Roger.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, there are a lot of moments like that, and so, yeah, Roger just, I mean, when Timothy Dalton came along, it was sort of a reaction, sort of course correction, sort of veering in the opposite direction. But there's a lot to enjoy in those Roger films, and if you just in the mood for like a casual viewing as a Bond fan, the Roger ones are usually the ones you pull out first.
Yeah.
Whereas like the more serious, gritty Bond films, they're great. I mean, I love From Russia with Love. I love Casino Royale. I love Living Daylights and License to Kill. I love those films, but I really have to be in the mood for those films.
Yeah.
Whereas I can be in any mood and pull out a Bond film and enjoy it.
I think that's probably the best way to sum up Roger's tenure. I think, isn't it, as Bond? Yeah, I mean, I remember being I was actually over in New Zealand when I'd sort of woke up the morning that morning and so my wife sort of looked over at me and said, oh, I got some bad news for you. And as soon as you hear that, you think, oh, okay, what are you going to tell me? And she said, it's in the news that Roger Moore's died. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, it's inevitable, it's going to happen, but for him to be the first to go was crushing, really.
It was.
And you just sort of look back over the movies. I remember sort of thinking, even though I was out of the country, I was thinking I really want to watch. I really want to watch a Roger movie now, and I felt very much the same way. Obviously, with Connery's passing as well, which is even more recent. But yeah, it's just when that happens to somebody, even though you're not related to them in any possible way, you kind of feel like you've lost somebody that you know.
Oh
It's
yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
it's a strange feeling, but I guess that's a feeling that the whole Bond community felt both of those occasions. Okay, right. Just to kind of sort of round up our chat, I'd obviously No Time to Die is just around the corner. We hope. Fingers crossed. I'm really firmly keeping my fingers crossed. What are you expecting from No Time to Die? I mean, presumably I think you did like a JBR episode where you were sort of deconstructed the trailer. So I imagine you've watched the trailers for it a number of times. How do you think this film is going to fit into the sort of Daniel Craig era? What are you expecting from the film?
Well, I actually have tried to sort of avoid rewatching the trailers because of all the
Okay.
delays. So yeah, it's been a while since we did that episode where we
Yeah.
deconstructed that first trailer that they released. But obviously, every time I go online, I see clips from it and stuff, in my feed. So, but I'm not one of these people who's trying to avoid it anyway. So I don't, it doesn't really bother me. But it's yeah, I guess the one big thing that I hope to see is I feel like Spectre I didn't really buy the chemistry or the relationship between Bond and Madeline Swan. So I didn't really, to me I didn't really feel like they really fell in love or anything like that. I felt like it really more or less felt like she was the Bond girl of that film, and then he should have just moved on and
Yes. Yeah.
met someone else. So this idea that she's sort of become a central figure in No Time to Die, and obviously that they had this love affair, and obviously things happen that sort of disrupts it. I hope that we get to sort of see why, find out what made Bond fall in love with her. Because I don't really feel like she's not one of my favorite characters. I mean, because I feel like she's kind of wishy-washy in Spectre. Like
Yeah.
obviously, she's not a terrible character, but she's, like Bond saves her, and then she was at one point she's going to leave him because she doesn't, obviously, you know, it's not explicitly stated, but her father's Mr. White, so I guess she doesn't want to get involved emotionally with another killer.
Mm.
That's why when they get to London, she's like, "Oh no, I'm going to leave now." But then, why did you fly to London from Blofield's base? Like, why wouldn't you just be like, "Okay, I'll take my own flight out wherever I want to go,"
Yeah.
instead of flying back to London with Bond, going to the meeting with M, and you know, and then being at Bond's side every step of the way until that point, and then she just turns around and is like, I can't do this anymore. To me, that's kind of wishy-washy kind
Mm.
of thing that so I guess obviously after the events of Spectre, they have a relationship, which should be interesting. I mean, because I feel like well, as you know from the Fleming books, Bond lives with Tiffany Case after the events of Diamonds Are Forever, and then between that book and the beginning of From Russia with Love, the novel From Russia with Love, their relationship, yeah, uh, dissolves. So it'll be interesting to sort of see what Bond's approach to the relationship is. How did they really fall deeply in love, and then how did that relationship dissolve? So I know none of this is like action. Most people when they want to say Bond film, it's all about the action. But to me, I love characters and I love story elements, and
Yeah.
to me that's a major story element that I think needs to be addressed.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, Madeline's not one of my particular favourite characters either, and I had the same. Yeah, I had the same sort of reaction to Spectre. It's all seemed very sort of convenient that she would suddenly, suddenly be saying that she'd fallen in love with him, and then, moments later they're driving off in the DB5 into the distance, and you think, it was kind of set in that way for Spectre to have been Craig's last film, and I know that Sam Mendes has said that himself. But obviously, Craig's been enticed back, wants to sort of flesh out the story a bit more. I think we will get a bit more of fleshed character for Madeline this time round. I think they've got room to expand on their on their love story, I guess. But as to where the film is going to sort of conclude and how Daniel Craig's tenure is going to be wrapped up, I really don't know at the moment. They could do a number of different things. Have you given that any sort of thoughts yourself?
I have. I mean, obviously, I've been following the film, since since the beginning, and I speculated a lot. I mean, I know initially when when Craig signed up and they were talking about the Danny Boyle, John Hodge story, that the idea was floated that this final Craig Bond film would be sort of the death of Bond, like he would be killed off. And I know a lot of fans sort of railed against it, but I mean, at this point, if it's Craig's last Bond film, even if it would sort of take something away, because obviously that they plan to make another Bond film. You're going to have Bond 26 with a new actor. So if you did kill off Craig's Bond, the impact of it, I don't think would have very much. It wouldn't really resonate with people, because they'll just say, well, okay, you're just going to get another guy to be James Bond.
Yeah.
It's not going to, So I mean, I know, we're used to seeing comic book movies where the comic book character dies. Obviously, famously, Superman was killed, and obviously he was killed in the comics, and then there was a whole way in the comic book universe to bring him back. There's a whole plot line and stuff that with the death of Superman. I don't know if you can do that with Bond. So I mean, I think even Craig might have been at one point made some comment about how he would be open to the idea of ending Bond by killing him off. But I don't know. I don't think they're going to do that. I think it's just going to have an ending where it may not be a picture perfect ending. Like he's not going to be, it's not going to be him riding off in the sunset. But it's going to be, maybe an ending that's maybe conflicted. I mean, another approach they can take is the way, if you're familiar with the Christopher Nolan Batman films, they could have ended that, with Dark Knight Rises. They could have ended it with, with the audience not really knowing whether or not Bruce Wayne survives, and but they didn't. They had that whole restaurant scene with where Michael Caine is at a restaurant and he sees Bruce Wayne and Catwoman there, and but one possibility is having this sort of ambiguous ending where maybe you as an audience member don't know for sure whether or not Bond survives. I don't know if they would be that I don't know if they would take that risk, though. I mean, I think we'll get some kind of closure. I think some kind of definitive closure. It won't be rosy, it won't be like a happy ending, but it'll be some kind of ending.
Yeah, I think that's a fair enough way to do it. I think as well. I think if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I just hope that we get an actor's final go out in the final time in the role, that's, you know, that's a decent send off. If you look back
Yeah.
at the others, like Diamonds was not the best way for Sean to exit. Obviously George only did the one. View to a Kill, yeah, not the most brilliant sort of finale for more, I guess. And obviously, the less we talk about Die Another Day, the better, I suppose. But poor Pierce. Yeah, I mean, to me, the best last performance of a Bond is License to Kill, still Dalton.
Oh yeah.
So I'm hoping that we get something of that quality, and I think we might. I think this might buck that trend.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things one of the ideas that I've kind of been sort of thinking about, you know, as we get closer to the release of the film, is that I don't know if the Craig's Bond is somewhat um, different. You know, like his Bond run. I mean, he was introduced with the idea in Casino that you know, he's not a fully formed James Bond. He's, you know, in Casino, he's starting out. He's very much, you know, wet around the ears, wet behind the ears, kind of. You know, he has a lot to learn, kind of thing. And then by the end of that film, you know, he has that emotional journey, and he deals with the betrayal of you know, Vesper's betrayed him, and but he's obviously, he still loves her, and you know, you see that even though he says the bitch is dead, you don't believe that he means it. And then uh, in Quantum, you have him, you know, sort of reconciling that. So he's not really that fully formed Bond yet, even though. And obviously, my guest David Lowbridge Ellis, who does the License to Queer blog. One of the things that he pointed out in one of his blogs is that, you know, the end of Casino Royale, which everyone points to, even Tom points to as one of their favorite scenes, is performative. Like, he's like, Bond isn't really uh, like, he's not even fully formed there, at least internally. It's more or less, he's selling us, the audience, a performance that he's the Bond that we know, but it's not necessarily, he's not the fully formed Bond yet. And so, like, and you have the journey of Quantum, where, you know, he has this relationship with Camille, and you know, his relationship with Camille sort of informs you know, an internal kind of struggle that he's, for him to process what had the events of the previous film. That's why I love Quantum, because there's a lot of like these subtle, nuanced kind of storytelling. There's a lot of great storytelling going on, that, but it's not explicit. You have to sort of you know, really, you know, analyze it and stuff. And so you have Quantum, and like he kind of goes rogue in Quantum, and like, you don't really, he's not really a fully formed. I guess by the end of Quantum, you assume that he's a fully formed Bond, because he's sort of, he's returning to MI6, and you know, obviously he has it famously ends with him saying, "I never left." He tells Bond that line. So presumably he goes on, and he, you know, and he's the Bond that we know, you know, that we, between that, the end of that film and the beginning of Skyfall. So you have like maybe a period of time where he's going on these missions for Judi Dench M, and he's earned the reputation of like being the fully formed Bond, but we don't see it. And then we get to the beginning of Skyfall, and then the pre-credits of Skyfall, he gets shot, and you know, he starts off as the fully formed Bond, but when after he returns to MI6 and returns to M, he's suddenly, you know, lost his step, and he's, you know, he's struggling to pass all the MI6 tests, you know,
Mm.
and the marksman's exam and all that stuff. So like, you know, he's not the top double agent, even though he's treated as, he's not the top 00 agent, even though he's treated that way, because you know, Judi Dench, you know, regards him that way. But he's not. He doesn't have. You know, he's not full. You know, he's not fully there for most of the film. And then he ends that film with, obviously, Judi Dench M dies, and Ray Fiennes M replaces her. And then obviously that film ends famously with, you know, Ray Fiennes M giving Bond the for your eyes only envelope, and Bond's ready to go on another mission. And so you know between that time and the beginning of Spectre, I guess presumably Bond is back to being a fully formed agent, but then he goes rogue in Spectre, and like he has this whole and then he ends up retiring by the end of the film. So you only have brief periods where Bond is sort of the fully formed Bond that we're used to, the character that that we know as the audience as the fully formed Bond. You don't really get to see it much in Craig's tenure. I mean, that's just it's my attempt at sort of.
No, yeah, I mean, it certainly works as its own sort of standalone sort of thread, doesn't it? I mean, that's the big part of the argument for Daniel Craig's Bond being a completely separate story arc to everything that's come before. Obviously, I know, sort of starting with Casino Royale, that was always kind of a given. That was always on the table from the start. But I guess even if they'd started with a slightly different story and had sort of started with the kind of origins of Bond again, even if it wasn't Casino Royale, it is very sort of stop and start, like you said. So yeah, I hope we get a solid Bond adventure this time, where we see Bond actually doing most of the classic stuff that you'd expect Bond to be doing, and actually enjoying himself on the mission. I think for the most part he actually is going to this time, sort of looking at some of the humor that they've sort of added into the trailers as well. Bond sort of being brought back into active service again. I think it's I've got high hopes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and also I think that there is good potential for conflict. I mean, I don't want to give away spoilers, but I think that the Nomi character, who played by Lashana Lynch, she's going to be there to sort of challenge Bond, and you can see that there's going to be a lot of really cool banter between them. I think that's going to be part of seeing a Bond that sort of enjoying himself in this element, even if he's sort of reluctantly coming back.
Right. Well, No Time to Die is just around the corner, so let's keep our fingers crossed that it's going to stick to the release date, that we get to see it and get to share our love or whatever else for the film once it's released. Jack, thank you very much for joining me for the chat. I really enjoyed it, and I will let you get on with the rest of your day. It's a bit of a time difference obviously between the two of us, so I'm kind of winding down at this point, and well, you're sort of, I'm trying to think, you're sort of early afternoon now, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm gonna grab some lunch, I guess. And, do some stuff.
All right. Well, we'll take care. All the best to yourself and your family, and it's just stay safe. And hopefully we'll get a chance to catch up again at some point once No Time to Die's had a chance to settle, and we can have another chat about it.
Yeah, I mean, and definitely you should maybe think about a character you want to do for Bond and Banter if you want to.
Cool. I will give it some thought, definitely. All right. Cheers, Jack. Thanks very much.
All right. Thanks.
Cheers. All right. Cheers.